My assault occurred on February 18th, 2010, and I was assaulted by the former chief diversity officer at Central Connecticut State University. He actually was a former professor of mine. Basically, the day that we met that the assault occurred, I was going to talk to him about a letter of recommendation because I was applying for graduate school. I went and met up with him, and he wanted to go off campus to grab some lunch. And so we walked to the car, and at that point I was really nervous because he had parked all the way in the back of the restaurant near a dumpster. And he got in the car and he just stared at me. And he took my purse and my book bag and threw it in his back seat. And then he started, going into touching me inappropriately, and I was resisting and kept saying that I had to leave. Finally, I just got louder and louder. At that point, I really didn't know what to do. I really didn't know if anybody would believe me. I really didn't even process entirely what had happened to me at that point. I found out that this had happened to other people, that he had done this several times.
Cases like these are not unusual. 1 in 5 women will be sexually assaulted while attending college. The overwhelming majority of these assaults will occur in the first 3 months, which is often referred to as the red zone.
Sexual assault is any sexual act on a male or female that is unconsensual.
Any physical action that makes you feel uncomfortable, like anything that crosses the line for you.
I would say any encounter, a sexual encounter forced upon the person. I think rape would be a higher degree of sexual assault.
Sexual assault, I would define it as a sexual act upon someone that's not wanted, or if they're not in the right state of mind.
A former student from Wesleyan is suing that school now, and in court documents, she accuses one fraternity of being a rape factory.
The Wesleyan chapter of Beta Theta Pi issued a response to the sexual assaults alleged to have occurred in its house. Attorney Douglas Fearberg is representing the victim in the Wesleyan case.
First of all, universities have an obligation to accurately identify and report dangers facing women on campus. And so some of those responsibilities come from a clear reporting obligation, but also a general common law obligation to advise women of dangers so they can take measures to protect themselves.
We went to Wesleyan to see how much students knew about their school's efforts to address sexual assault on campus.
Do you know who's responsible for student safety on this campus?
Obviously, P-Safe plays a role. I also think the student body is mostly responsible for student safety.
Like public safety, maybe?
I think the administration plays a role in it as well, in the sense that just kind of making resources available for students.
Would it be the class deans? I have no idea.
Connecticut Sexual Assault Crisis Services in East Hartford produced a campus report card in 2012. Bethany Hamilton, Director of Prevention and Programs, was the author of the report.
Basically what we're trying to do is provide folks in Connecticut with a snapshot of how 2- and 4-year campuses are doing in addressing and preventing sexual violence on campus.
According to the report card, Greek fraternities received an F.
Quite simply, that F just comes from exactly what the report card asks is, do you require that student members of Greek life receive mandatory sexual assault education? So a yes would mean that they would bring that grade up, and universities that said no would bring that grade down.
Rather than responding directly to the allegations involving the Beta House, Wesleyan sent an email to students prohibiting them from residing in or using residences not recognized by the university.
I think that campuses in general are really insular, and they're sort of little microcosms, little communities in and of themselves. And then when it comes to Greek life, that's even more insular, and they're very exclusive clubs. And oftentimes I think that what happens is you have that exclusivity sort of combined with lots of other things like alcohol, like parties, that kind of stuff, and make it so that folks are not going to be as willing, the folks in Greek life, to take on that education.
Representative Roberta Willis addressed the legal obligations universities have.
under the federal law, which is called the Jean Clary Act, which requires that college campuses provide information and education to students on sexual assault on college campuses. And it also has very specific reporting requirements that colleges need to report on an annual basis, you know, the number of cases and how they've been handled.
Anna Doragazi from Connecticut Sexual Assault Crisis Services says that universities do not always comply.
I think there's a really interesting disincentive on college campuses to prosecute offenders, because that information is something that parents and students are going to look into when they're looking at campuses. It's something that we have this ongoing struggle with around how colleges and universities report victimization on campus. When I personally see a campus that says they had 0 sexual assaults in the past year, I know that the administration isn't committed to being forthcoming about what's actually happening on their campus.
So when you look at the challenge of 1 in 4, 1 in 5 students during their college career are going to be victims of sexual assault, and then you go the next step and you realize 50% of those incidences are never going to get reported, and they're not going to get reported because students don't identify them as sexual assault, because it's someone that they knew.
To combat campus sexual assault, we must focus less on the behavior of victims and more on the education of potential perpetrators.
I would love to see that by the time my daughter goes to school, that we've shifted that paradigm, so it's not her responsibility to ward off that sexual assault. It becomes the young men's responsibility on that campus to make sure that everybody's being held accountable so that they're not perpetrating sexual violence in any way. So it's important for us to focus less on what girls can do to protect themselves and ward off sexual violence, and more to focus on what men and boys can do to not perpetrate sexual violence.
We shouldn't be telling people, you know, here's what you as a potential victim need to do to stay safe, but instead we're addressing potential offenders and saying, you know, most people go through their life without raping anybody.
It really bothers me when, on a personal level, when I hear someone victim blaming or saying that that couldn't have happened to them, or because it can. It can happen to anyone, at any time, anywhere, by anyone. And nobody has the right to tell a victim or survivor that they don't believe them, that what happened to them wasn't a big deal, that they shouldn't have been doing something, because it's not their responsibility, it's the person who did its responsibility.